I'm going to talk about the romantic ideals in chapters 7 9, through 9. In chapters 7 through 9, naturalistic romantic ideals are shown throughout. The wilderness, which is one of the most distinguishing characteristics of Romanticism, is referred to twice. The first time is in chapter 7, when Victor finds his brother was murdered. He heads to Geneva, and the gates of the city have been closed for the night. So he begins to walk through the outlying forest. This shows romantic ideals because he is alone, with nothing else to bother him except nature. It is also night, which gives him a sense of self. One's senses are opened, and you become one with the forest. As said by Victor on page 49, "The sky was serene, and I was unable to rest." This part of the book relates to a well-known romantic work by author Thoreau, called Walden, which follows Thoreau's stay in the woods by himself. Victor then describes it is time to visit the site of his brother's death. He proceeds to take a boat ride there, where he encounters an oncoming storm. He states also on page 49, "During the short voyage I saw the lightning playing on the summit of Mount Blanc in most beautiful figures, showing an appreciation of nature, reverting yet again back to romantic qualities." He now makes his way towards his brother's murder site. This is when the chapter starts to turn to a more dark romantic side of things. He notices the storm again, but instead of appreciation, he relates it to death. The noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed aloud, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this is thy dirge." At this time he comes to notice the monster lurking in a clump of trees. This is the defined shift from a romantic to dark romantic structure. With the introduction of the monster, this eludes the grotesque ideal of dark romanticism. A flash of lightning illuminated the object, and discovered its shape plainly to me, its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity. This is when Victor realizes that the monster had killed William, leading to chapter 8. Victor finds out that Justine is accused of the murder of William. Though Victor and Elizabeth know that she didn't do it, Justine confesses and is executed. Now in Victor's mind, the monster has directly and indirectly killed two members of his family. This now throws an arabesque theme into the mix. Victor is holding himself responsible for the deaths, because his creation caused them. This mentally tortures him to the point of suicide. Chapter 9 shows a transition from dark romanticism back to romanticism, just to fade back into dark romanticism once again in chapter 10. Chapter 9 is when Victor actually contemplates suicide. His mental state as described on page 61. Nothing is more painful to the human mind than after the feelings have been worked up by a quick succession of events, the dead calmness of inaction, and certainly which follows and deprives the soul both hope and fear. As said above, this shows arabesque qualities. The deaths of his family members are twisted in his mind to the point of suicide, but thoughts of his remaining family stop him. The family then takes a trip to their home in Bellerive. Victor's father hopes to cheer him up through this. Once there, Victor wanders alone towards the valley of Charmonix. This relates back to chapter 7, solitude in the wilderness, letting the forest take his grief away.
Chapter 10 finds Victor lost in despair. To relieve his depression, he seeks out a view of nature, hoping its pure, eternal scene would revive his spirits. When he reaches the mountain, he is confronted by the monster. The monster shuns Victor's threats and hate. And if you will all turn with me to page 69 in your book, 2 paragraphs in, the monster states, "How can I move thee? Will no entreaties cause thee to turn a favorable eye upon thy creature, who implores thy goodness and compassion? Believe me, Frankenstein, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity. But am I not alone, miserably alone? You, my creator, abhor me. What hope can I gather then from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me. The desert mountains and dreary glaciers are my refuge. I have wandered here many days, the caves of ice which I do not fear, and a dwelling to me, and the only one which man does not grudge. These bleak skies I hail, for they are kinder to me than your fellow beings. If the multitude of mankind knew of my existence, they would do as you do, and arm themselves for my destruction. The monster then continues to implore Frankenstein that instead of doing battle with him and hating him, that Victor should follow him to his cave, and the monster instead begins to narrate his life. The narration starts with Frankenstein's monster discussing the confusion he felt after his birth. Based on his story, he found a fire shortly after his flight from Frankenstein, and though he is attracted to it, he's also scorned by the fire when it burns him. The use of fire in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein brings to mind that the story is a modern Prometheus. In the story of Prometheus, Prometheus gives the gift of fire to humanity and was punished for it. Victor Frankenstein tries to give the gift of the knowledge of life to humanity, but is instead unsuccessful. Searching for food, the monster finds a hut and takes up residence in it, but scares an old man in doing so. He proceeds to various other human homes until he ends up in a shed outside a cottage. Here, he discovers that he can see into the cottage, and so he begins to observe his new neighbors. In Chapter 12, Frankenstein's monster realizes that his new neighbors are unhappy, and through studying their behaviors, he learns of their poverty. Up until this point, the monster had been eating some of their food, and so he stops, and instead decides to aid them. To do this, he goes into the woods to gather firewood. A big focal point through all romantic literature is the natural world and its unrestrained emotional experience for the person experiencing it. When Victor is feeling depressed, for instance, over the deaths of William and Justine, he seeks the mountains to raise his spirits. In a similar way, the monster seeks the beauty of spring after a harsh and hard winter. Victor, however, loses his love for nature when he realizes the monster will continue to haunt him, and in the end, the barren winter wastes make a symbolic backdrop for the feral struggle against the monster. After gathering firewood for the family living next to him, he studies them and learns their names. He also begins to learn language by observing it in his neighbors, and by the end of the chapter, he has grown quite affectionate towards his unwitting protectors.